Good morning. It's Sunday morning, December 26th, 2021. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Sunday school class. So hopefully I'm not too late. Some of you are still watching. We're in the book of Genesis. We're in the 46th chapter of Genesis. We've been we started in March of last year. Genesis chapter 1, we're almost to the end of Genesis. We will be going on to Exodus. Um, Joseph was in Egypt and has invited his family to come down. So you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. Son number 11 was thrown into a pit, sold off into slavery by his brothers, but he eventually became the second highest ranking guy in Egypt. He's invited his family to come down, and his father's been reluctant to come down. We were looking at that last week. Just to quickly remind you, in Genesis chapter 46, verse 1, it says, So Israel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob's other name is Israel. Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac. And so we discussed last week about Isaac and why he built the altar there. Um, Isaac, for some reason, was never supposed to ever leave Canaan. Abraham, he got to go to Egypt for a few months when there was a famine, and then he went back to Canaan. But Isaac, like, do not leave Egypt. So I don't know what he would have done. Escaped, probably because his father had tried to kill him in Canaan. So I understand. So it was like, don't leave Canaan land. In Genesis chapter 24, verse 3 through 4, it says, and I will, this is Abraham talking about Isaac, and he's talking to his servant, which go find a wife for my son Isaac. It says, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. Like, because the Canaanites, again, they're the cursed people, not Ham. Hey, hey, Brent, thank you. That's very sweet for you to take a second. I'm sure you just took a second and you went. Hi, Susie. Um, the um, uh, the Canaanite. So Shem, Ham. It's not the sons of Ham were not cursed. The sons of Canaan, specifically just Canaan, Noah's grandson. They're cursed. Everybody knew it. Don't take something's wrong with the Canaanites. They're going to give you Sodom and Gomorrah and all this stuff. Do not. Okay, so that was clear. And then in 6 through 8 of Genesis chapter 24, it says, Abraham said also to his servants, beware that you do not take my son back there. Like when you go up to Syria to look for a wife, do not take my son back there. It's really interesting. Even God came to Isaac and said, do not leave Canaan. In Genesis 26, verses 1, it says, there was a famine in the land, besides the first famine in the days of Abraham. So there's a second famine. Isaac got his own famine. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar, and then the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you, which is Canaan, Israel. So Abraham got to leave for a few months because God knew he'd come back. Isaac, for some reason, was not allowed to leave at all. So Isaac's son, Jacob, is nervous, like, can I leave? And the good thing is, God will give restrictions to one person, like, you should not ever go there. But it may be okay for you to do it. Just because they can't doesn't, we're all different, right? So maybe somebody should never ever drink. Someone else might say, oh, well, once a week I have a glass of wine. God knows that person can handle it, and God knows you can't. For some reason, Isaac could not handle going down to Egypt. So, in Genesis chapter 26, verse 23, Isaac finally goes to Beersheba. He hasn't been there since his he hasn't been there since his father tried to sacrifice him on the altar and then brought him back to Beersheba and then lived there a little while. And then they moved up to Hebron when his mom died, and he hadn't been back to Beersheba. I think there's a reason he hadn't gone back to Beersheba. But anyway, he shows up at Beersheba. So in Genesis 26, verse 23, then he went from there to Beersheba. And the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I'm the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I'm with you. And I'm thinking, God doesn't always. What at that point? What did he had to be afraid of? Unless he literally was afraid to be back in Beersheba. To me, there's no. Oh well. I will bless you and I will multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there, called on the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. So he built an altar and a well. So now his son Jacob is back there years later, and he's praying, should I go down to Egypt? Because you told my daddy not to go. I says, yes, you can go. So Genesis 46:2, then God spoke to Israel, Israel, Jacob, same person, in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. Even in the same sentence, called him Israel, called him Jacob. And again, Israel, whenever he's referring to his place as patriarch, when he's referring to the promises, Jacob, when he's talking to his flesh, human, emotional side, right? So God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here am I. So he says, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. Even though I told Isaac at this very same spot, don't go down to Egypt. You can go. For I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes, right? When you pass away, he will be there to close your eyes for you. So you can go because I'm going to bring you back. So in Genesis chapter 46, verse 8, he then begins to name the writer of Genesis, who is Moses, begins to write. Now here's, again, I want to put this in perspective. Moses, during the 40 years in the wilderness, when Moses is leading the children of Egypt for 40 years, Moses had a lot of time. So he recorded all this history, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. He wrote everything down. The book of Genesis was important to explain to the children of Egypt and remind them, here's why we are here, the children of Israel. Here's what happened to get us here, and here's why we need the law, and why God is leading us to the promised land. So he's retelling the story and recording it for them so that they can remember, so God promised this to us in the first place, and now that's why we're headed back. So Moses then goes on to list all the people who came with Jacob, Israel, to Egypt. These were the names of the children of Israel, verse 8. Jacob and his sons who went to Egypt. So Reuben was Jacob's firstborn, reminding you that Reuben was disqualified from the rights of a firstborn because Reuben went and slept with one of his father's stepwives. So, with the stepmother. So, even though he's the firstborn, no more rights. When they come back to the promised land, Reuben, you don't get any place because you're bad. So the sons of Reuben were Hanach, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. These are the people that Reuben is bringing with him, that first generation that's going to be raised in Egypt. These are the sons of Simeon. Simeon, okay, was Jemul, Jamin, Achad, Jachin, Johar, Shaul, and Shaul was the son of a Canaanite woman. Now they mention that specifically because Simeon has a problem. And so they weren't supposed to do not touch Canaanite women. The Midianites you can go to because the Midianites are also descendants of Abraham through his second wife. Moab, the Moabites you can go to because they're descendants of Lot and Lot's kids. The Edomites, those are Esau's kids. Don't take a wife of the Canaanites, and yet Simeon did and gave us Shaul. Now, this produced something later on. When they are in the wilderness, standing in, 400 years later, standing in front of the temporary tabernacle that they've put up, and they've gone to war and lost because they weren't trusting in God and believing in God, and Moses comes down and gives them a word, and you guys, you need to get it together, right? God is angry. We've got to stop sinning. So Numbers chapter 25, after they've gotten this huge sermon and everybody is vowed, that they're going to live right from now on. So Numbers chapter 25, verse 6, it says, and indeed, one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brother a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel. Now, they're standing in front of the temple, and he's basically saying, hey, here's a prostitute. I know we're right in front of the temple, but I found this Midianite woman. Would some of you like to have her? Now it says, in front of the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. They were in the middle of repenting and crying and weeping before the Lord. The tabernacle, they hadn't built a temple yet, right? So they just have this temporary tent up. They call it the tabernacle, but the Ark of the Covenant's inside and God's presence is inside. People are crying and repenting. And this particular one of the children of Israel, hey, I've got a prostitute. Anybody interested? So, and that wouldn't go over well in the middle of service at church. Now, when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, so we've got Aaron, Eleazar, Phinehas, and they're Levites, by the way, saw it, he rose from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her body. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. So it turns out later that it says that this was a son of Simeon. That same line, that wayward line of Simeon. And they became more wicked, Simeon's group, more angry, doing crazy things. And the Levites are the ones that start punishing people. Like if you sin and God said don't sin, they would stop you. And this is actually part of the split, because I don't know if you remember that Simeon and Levi both got in trouble because they killed all those men that had raped Dinah. So actually one guy, the prince of Shechem, had his way with their sister Dinah, and everybody was very upset. But Levi and Simeon went and they tricked all the men of Shechem to get circumcised, right? And all they had to circumcise people with these sharp stones. So on the third day, they were still in pain, and that's when they came in and got them and killed them all. This is Simeon and Levi. And so they were punished, like, you guys are crazy. Simeon kind of stayed crazy, but something happened with Levi, and suddenly the Levites were put in charge of everybody's spiritual warfare. And this is part of it, this thing that happened. A son of Simeon did something, brought a prostitute to the temple, and a son of Levi, the son of Levi, came and killed him and the woman. The spear went through both of them because they were standing too close together. So, now, the sons of Levi. So we've listed the sons of Reuben. This is the sons of Simeon. The next, in Genesis 46:11, says the sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Okay, so even though Simeon and Levi both should have been in trouble, Levi suddenly was given this very exalted position as priest. And Simeon and them kind of stayed on the outskirts. So we're going to read, how come Levi didn't stay in trouble? What if he sounds pretty crazy to me. He just killed somebody. Well, he killed somebody for bringing a prostitute to the temple right in the presence of God. Okay, so these are the sons of Levi. There's Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. So Levi has 3 sons, and this is who he's bringing with him. This is that first generation that he's bringing with him to Egypt. At the time, they don't know that there's going to be 4 generations in Egypt. They think they're just coming down with their father to visit Joseph for a little bit and leave. But something happened, which we'll read in the next chapter, that enticed them to stay. And then once they decided to stay, a new Pharaoh showed up who enslaved them. But it was their decision to stay. They weren't supposed to have stayed. So in Exodus chapter 6, verse 16 says, these are the names of the sons of Levi, according to generations. So Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, right? And the years of the life of Levi being 137 years. So that's important, how long he lived. These are the sons of Kohath. There's the middle son. He had Amram, Ishak, Hebron, Uziel, And the years of life of Kohath was 133 years. Okay. So that's Amram, Ishar, Hebron, Uziel. Now, Amram took a wife. So you've got Levi's. His first generation is Kohath. That's his middle son. Today's Cohens, the Cohen family, right? If you know anyone who's Jewish, last name is Cohen. They're right from there. Cohen has Amram. So that's the third generation. So Amram took as his wife Jochebed, his father's sister. And she bore him Aaron and Moses. So that fourth generation, Aaron and Moses are born. Jochebed is Moses' mom. Now, Aaron, yes. Now, Aaron took as his wife Elisheba, the daughters of Aminadab, and the sister of Nashon. So Aaron's wife, her name is Elisheba. Elisheba is the daughter of Aminadab, and Aminadab is descended from Judah. And Aminadab, Elisheba's sister is Nashon, and Nashon became a famous Judah prince who led all the attacks and stuff while they were in the wilderness before they went to the promised land. And she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar, and we'll hear all about Nadab and Abihu and all of them later. Nadab and Abihu, those are the two sons of Aaron who used strange fire, they call it. God had come down and done all these incredible things in front of the temple, and the sacrifice, he lit it on fire, and they took a little bit of the fire, stole some, put it in their land, said, look what God did. Look, he gave us fire too. And then God struck them down. Okay, I guess you want fire? Okay. So, because we're not supposed to take the Lord's glory and lie about God and say, look what God, if God's not anointing you to do something, don't give God, don't say, God gave me this fire. No, he didn't. You just want that fire so everybody can applaud you, think you're wonderful. And so that's a problem. That's a problem for God, especially from the priest who are supposed to be showing everybody how to live. He's harder on the priest. So if you look at Levi's line, there's Levi, Kohath, Amram, Aaron's the third generation. So Kohath is Levi's son that he brought. That's that first generation. Amram, Aaron, Eleazar. They're born in Egypt. Before Aaron and Moses ever said, let my people go, they both had kids who were born in Egypt. That's the fourth generation. And everybody else was born either in the wilderness or the promised land. So 4 generations. Judah, who is next to be talked about, he had 5 generations. If you read in 1 Chronicles chapter 2, Judah, it says Tamar, his daughter-in-law, bare him Perez. So even though Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law, Judah had a son by Tamar. So Tamar gives you Perez, and Perez is the first generation that Judah is bringing with him to Israel. That's generation number 1. So it says all the sons of Judah are 5, but we know that 2 of them died. He had the third son that he neglected to give to Tamar. So he had 2 more sons himself by Tamar who were way younger than his other sons by about 18 years, at least 20 years. Now, the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. Then it says in verse 9, and the sons of Hezron that were born unto him was Jeremiel, Ram, and Chelubai. And then Ram begot Aminadab, and Aminadab begot Nashon. So Nashon, that's that Judah prince, right, who was also born in Egypt. But there's 5 generations with him. You got Judah, Perez, Hezron, Ram, Abinadab, and Nashon. So it's supposed to just be 4. And you'll see how they solve it later. In this case, sometimes when you have people born, you can be, if you have a large family, 8 kids, 10 kids. Sometimes the oldest kids could be 15 years older than the youngest. And they might start having kids at the age of 20 while you're 5. And so you kind of get mixed in with that new generation, even though you're from an older generation. You're 5, and yet you have a nephew that's 1. Uh, and the generations kind of get messed up because you start having kids when you grow up, and so does your 1-year-old nephew, and your kids are the same age, but they're in 2 different generations. I think that's what happened here with Judah and Perez. While there's 5 of them, there's supposed to be 4 generations that are born in Egypt, but they've got 5 because I just think someone was born too late and a generation got mixed up. So what they do when they describe the Judah in Genesis chapter 46, verse 12, it says, the sons of Judah were Onan, Shelah, right? Then Perez and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. And the writer tries to act like Hezron and Hamul were the first generation that was brought. But actually, Perez was the first generation that was brought, because if you do the math, Perez was like 2 years old. Perez hadn't had kids yet. But they're trying to make it everybody 4 generations. So, and that's just Moses. Again, this was written 200 years after the fact. So when they started calculating, they thought to themselves, well, Perez must have brought his kids with him, because that would make 4 generations if Perez's kids were that first generation. All right. And again, it was 200 years later. We've got the whole Bible. We can look at it all and go, they made that up. Okay. Now, why is this a big deal? 4 generations, 5 generations. In Genesis chapter 15, verse 14 through 16, when God is talking to Abraham about your descendants are going to be strangers in the land and be slaves in the land, who they will serve. It says in verse 14, and also the nation whom they will serve I will judge, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. So your descendants are going to be strangers in the land, and they're going to be slaves in Israel, in Egypt, but I'm going to judge that nation. He doesn't say what it is. And then they'll come out with great possessions. In verse 15 says, now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. This won't happen to you. And you shall be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation, they shall return here. And so he tells them, in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So I cannot give you this land, and the land belongs to the Canaanites. And at a certain point, God's going to say, okay, take the land. The Canaanites, your lease is up. And the Canaanites included the Jebusites and the Hittites and the Amorites and all these ites, right? And God's going to you can go ahead and take this land because they are so sinful. I keep giving them a chance to repent. But their cup is not full of sin yet. There's a point where it just gets full and God says, done. And so that's why you can't have it now. You're going to be strangers in this land. But at a certain point, then you'll be able to take it. So he tells them the 4th generation that goes to this place will come out. And that's why the authors are very intent on saying it's only 4 generations, even though Judah had 5. So now here is, when you check everybody's lineage, it's 4 generations in Egypt. And the big question is, were they in Egypt for 400 years or were they in Egypt for 200 years? Some people teach 400 years, some people teach 200 years. For the people, so the way I have studied it, I believe that they were only in Egypt for 215 years, 200 or so years. And I'll explain why. But here's a verse. This is why the people who believe it was 400 years in Egypt, they base it on this verse. They think that from Ephraim, who is Joseph's son, to his kid that was in the wilderness is 10 generations and not 4. Even though God said, I'll bring this out of the fourth generation, they read this particular passage incorrectly, and they think that 10 generations have gone by. So it says they were 10 generations. And if you just do 40 years per generation, that's 400 years. So, but here, listen to this. It says in 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 20, it says, the sons of Ephraim were Shuthelah, Bered, his son, Tahath, his son, Eladah, his son, Tahath, another, so there's a second Tahath. I guess he really liked that name. His son, Zabad, his son. Now, it says, Shuthelah, his son, and Ezer, and Eliad. So he lists a bunch of sons, and you either those are all the sons of Ephraim, or they're each their own son. Because it says the sons of Ephraim were Shuthelah, Bered, his son. So is that still talking about Ephraim? Tahath, his son. Eladad, his son. Are they still just talking about Ephraim? Or are these grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great, right? Because it just says Tahath, his son. Now, here's the next sentence. The men of Gath who were born in that land killed them because they came down to take away their cattle. So it says, then Ephraim, their father, mourned many days, and his brethren came to comfort him. So Ephraim is the father of all those sons that were just mentioned. Even though it says Bob, his son, and Bill, his son, and Tom, his son, and Dave, his son, all the hises is referring back to Ephraim. But you could read that and think Bob, and then his son was James, and then his son was Jim, and his son was Eric, right? But it says Ephraim, their father, mourned, and he wouldn't have been alive 10 generations later, 400 years later, to mourn if they're talking about his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids. So even though it says his son, his son, his son, his son, they're all referring back to the same dad. But people think, no, that's 10 generations, and it's confusing to me. Same thing in the next verse. In 23, it's the same thing, 1 Chronicles chapter 7. So talking about Ephraim, and he went to his wife, she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name Beriah, which means tragic, because tragedy come upon his house. So now he's starting to have more sons. Now his daughter was Shirah, who built Lower and Upper Beth Horon and Uzan Shirah. So his daughter was responsible, and her progeny, for building this big city. So good for her. They had to acknowledge a woman who did incredible things. And then it says, and Rephtah, who was his son, as well as Rephshalah and Telah, his son. Again, still just talking about Ephraim, who had more kids. But people think, no, that's a continual line. Telah, his son. Now, it then says Tehah, son, and somewhere, and Ladan, his son, and Amradah, his son, and Eliashima, his son. Then it says Nun, his son, and Joshua, his son. And you know, Joshua was the son of Nun. So at a certain point, it does switch to grandson, great-grandson, great-great-grandson. But the people who've studied this, especially the people who put together the Septuagint. Sept means 70, right? And the Septuagint was put together about 300 years before Christ by the Greeks. They got 70, really it was 72, but they just say 70 because they think 70 is a special number. 70 Jewish scholars, and they took them to Egypt, and they had them translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And from then, and that Greek Bible went all over the world of the Old Testament, and everybody was reading from Greek. And in fact, Greek became the language of the world for a while, and that's why Paul writes in Greek, and so much of the New Testament is in Greek. But these 70 scholars, when they read all of this and read the whole Bible, they determine every other time it's mentioned how many generations there are from when the children of Israel first came in to when they left is 4 generations. And they determined they were only there for 215 years. And that this is not 10 generations of kids from Ephraim, but 5 of those were just more kids of Ephraim. And then you get to the next generations. Okay. So it says in Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, he says to Abraham, know certainly that your descendants will be stranger in a land that is not theirs, which is Canaan, the land they're currently in, and also Egypt, Canaan and Egypt together. So they'll be stranger in a land that is not theirs and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. So altogether, 400 years. So Paul, who wrote the New Testament, interpreted that as Canaan and Egypt. You're going to be strangers. It's going to be 400 years before I give you this land. So you'll be strangers here now, and then you're going to serve time with those people, and then I'll bring you out from them. Here's what Paul says, and Paul's reading the Septuagint. Paul's reading the Greek version of the Bible that these Jewish scholars have put together. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, it says, now to Abraham and his seed were the promise made. When Abraham first got there, when he was 75 years old, when he first got to Canaan land, God made him a promise. First, at the age of 70, he says, go, just go. So he packed up his stuff. He didn't know where he was going. Just walk, just start walking. That's how God is sometimes. I don't know why I'm doing this. God just has me doing this, and he's not telling me. And if you have had that experience, then you know Jesus. So he says, go. And by the time he's 75, he's finally packed up everything and has been walking. And that's when God first appears to him once he gets to Canaan and say, this land, I'm going to give you this land. And Abraham's looking around and thinking, there's no Canaanites here. How are you going to get, I'm one person. But that's when he made the promise at the age of 75. He says, so now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds as of many, but as of one. So he's saying he's made that promise to Jesus. Jesus was in Abraham's loins at that point, all of his descendants. And sometimes that's how God would look at people, and the people would look like the seed is within you. So, I'm talking to you. I'm really talking to your seed that's going to come after you, because it's there in you right now, and to your seed who's Christ. And this, I say, that the law, which was 430 years later, so after the promise, 430 years later came the law. And it cannot annul the covenant that was confirmed before by God in Christ, that it should make the promise of no effect. So he gave the promise when Abraham was 75, and then gave the law 430 years later. So that's a total of 430 years from Abraham being 75 years of age until when Moses gave the law. That's how Paul looks at it. So let's do some math. Yay, math. Abraham's 75. He has his child when he's 100. So 25 years have gone by since the promise. Isaac was 60 when he had his first child. So 60 and 25 is 85. Isaac's first child, well, not first child, but Isaac's son is Jacob or Israel. And the Bible tells us that when Israel got to Egypt, he was 130. So that's 25 plus 60, which is 85, and 130 is 215 years. So the way they calculated, it was 215 years to get to Egypt, and then they were there for 215 years approximately, and they make it 430. Like, that was the halfway point. And they say from the promise when Abraham was 75 until Moses handing down the law was a total of 430 years. So they divided 215 and 215. Okay, that's how they came up with 430, even though God said 400. Now, let's go there. So he gave him the promise when Abraham was 75, but the second addendum to it, he gave it to him when he was 90, when he said, it'll be 400 years. So from the time, if you subtract 15 years, because he was 75, then he was 90, right? That's 15 years. So technically it was 200 years from the time that God made that second promise. It was 200 years till they got to Egypt. It was 215 years when Abraham first got there, but it was 15 years later that God said to Abraham it'll be 400 years. So some people want to divide it 200 and 200 and make it 400 years, and some people want to divide it 215 and 215 and make it 430 years. But either way, from the time of the promise until the time of the law, a total of 400 or 430 years, however you want to look at it. Well, that goes against a couple. Okay, now, so in Exodus chapter 12, verse 40, though, it says, the sojourn of the children of Israel. So a sojourn is when you're a stranger and you're not settled and you're just journeying, the sojourn of the children of Israel, when they were still just wandering from the time that they were in Canaan to the time of Egypt, right? The sojourn of the children of Israel who lived in Egypt was 430 years. So that scripture, well, it sounds like they were in Egypt for 430 years. But the grammar people say, no, he's saying the sojourn of the children of Israel, parenthesis, who lived in Egypt, not the time that, not how long they were in Egypt, but how long their total sojourn was. And we're talking about the group that ended up in Egypt and finally came out was 430 years. So that's how they define that. They say, in fact, the Septuagint people, they added the words who lived in Canaan in Egypt. They added those words in. So if you read the Septuagint version of the Bible, it'll say who lived in Canaan in Egypt, because they were clear that it was a total of 430 years. Because when they did the math, it was 4 generations. And unless everybody's having a child at 100 years old in Egypt, that's when they first have a child, like they all have an Abraham miracle. Then there was no way that they were, because there were only 4 generations in Egypt. There was no way that it was 430 years in one place. Now, plus they, okay, anyway. So, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 9 is, but you're saying the children of Israel weren't in Canaan. The children of Israel weren't there when Abraham, if he's saying it's a total of 130 years for the children of Israel, Abraham was by himself for many of those years. And then he just had one son. That's not the children of Israel. They came along much later. So how can the children of Israel be included in the promise made to Abraham? And like I said before, that's because when they're looking at someone, they're not just looking at you, they're looking and talking to, at least God is, talking to the generations that are going to come through you. So God looks at you, but he's talking to your grandchildren or your children. And there are things he's telling you that are going to apply to those coming after you, but they're inside of you as far as God is concerned. For example, in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 9, Hebrews 7, 9, it says, even Levi, who receives tithes, so Levi, the priest, they received your tithes. It says, paid tithes through Abraham, so to speak. When Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, he said Levi paid tithes through Abraham. So even though Levi wasn't there, wasn't born yet, Paul is saying, because Abraham did it and those seed was in him, Levi did it. And that's just how the Bible looks at people. In Genesis 13:17, it says, arise and walk through the land. This is God talking to Abraham. Through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Well, God didn't give that land to Abraham. He actually gave it to his descendants that came 430 years later. But he said, I'm giving it to you. And when I say you, I mean you and all the people in you. And we understand that. Abraham, I'm giving you this land. Well, no. Well, yes, because it's going to go to your great grandchildren. So God sees your future when he's talking to you. In Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1, it says, and it shall be when you come into the land which the Lord, now, this is when Moses is giving them the final instructions. They are about to cross over into the land. This is 430 years later after the promise. 430 years later after the promise, they're about to go into the land. This is Moses' last instruction, and then Moses is going to go up into the mountain. They don't see him again. It says, it shall be when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and you possess it and you dwell in it, he tells them you're going to make a sacrifice to the Lord, etc. I'm going to skip down to verse 6. It says, and you'll say this. It says, but the Egyptians mistreated us, afflicted us, and laid hard bondage on us. Then we cried out to the Lord of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice, and he looked on our affliction and our labor and our oppression. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt. Now, the people who are going to say this were never in Egypt. The people who are going to pray this prayer were born in the wilderness. God didn't let anyone who was born in Egypt go make it to the promised land except for 2 people, Joshua and Caleb. All the rest of them were born in the wilderness, and this is not their story. But yet he's going to say, you're going to say, the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, with an outstretched arm, with great terror, and with signs and wonders. So when he's looking at them, he's looking at their parents. You're standing in for your parents standing in for you. God sees it all as one. He's blessing your family and your line, And when you're saying my people were oppressed, we were oppressed, and people will do that today. Talking, okay, we were slaves for all these years. Well, no, you weren't a slave, but you're standing in for your parents, and so God looks at both. So yes, when He says to them, the promise that they sojourned for 430 years, that's Canaan and Egypt, and the fourth generation came out. The fourth generation. So in Genesis chapter 46, except for Judah, had five generations. And so, what do we do with Judah? So the sons of Judah were Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. It says, but and Onan died in the land of Canaan. So remember that did something horrible. The Bible does not say what he did, but it just says, and the God had to bring him on back to heaven. Then Onan was supposed to marry Tamar, Er's wife, but Onan said, no, I don't want to give my brother any kids. So like the line of Judah is not going to continue because he refuses, because he doesn't want, because these kids are going to belong to my brother, and my kids won't get inherit anything. And so God had to take him. Shelah, Judah forgot about him. And so Tamar finally has to trick Judah into having sex with her. And then they finally give birth so that his line can continue. So Perez and Zerah, the twins, Perez and Zerah, they're the ones who continued the line. And then he goes on and says, now the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. So when he's listing the lines of the people that came to Egypt, that first generation that were brought there, not Reuben, Simeon, Levi, not the sons of Jacob. They were definitely born in Canaan land, but that first generation that was raised there, for every other person, they only mention Jacob's grandkids as that first generation, except for Judah. They mention Perez, and then they mention Perez's kids. But again, Perez was like 2 years old when the family went to, so he hadn't had kids yet. But it's just, again, I'm just saying 200 years later, Moses and they were trying to figure out, okay, they had 4 generations, they had 4 generations, they had 5. 5? That doesn't make sense. Oh, I know what must have happened. Perez must have brought his kids with him. Okay, now that makes it 4. But no, it was, Judah had 5. So when God says 4 generations, he just means in general, most of you, 11 out of you 12 kids, it'll be 4 generations. But Judah will have 5 generations. Okay. And then, you know what? I'm going to stop there, because that's just too much information. So to sum it all up, Jacob, who's also named Israel, is about to take his sons with him to Egypt to see Joseph. They brought their kids with them. And that's the first generation that actually lived. The kids are the first generation that actually lives in Egypt. And then their kids stay in Egypt, second generation. Then their kids, third generation. And that fourth generation is where Moses is born. And Moses is in the third generation. His kids are also born in Egypt. Moses had a kid. And if you remember Moses' kid, we'll get into the story because it's fascinating. But on the way to Egypt, after the burning bush, God talked to Moses. I want you to go down to Egypt. And then on the way to Egypt, it says that God tried to kill Moses. And they hadn't basically circumcised that son, because Moses had not circumcised his son yet. His son had been born in Egypt, but Moses had let go of the promises. And so when we get to Exodus, I'll explain why God tried to kill Moses right after he set the bush on fire. Fascinating God that we serve. And so it's that generation. That's the fourth generation. Moses's kids, Aaron's kids, that came out. So they're there for 4 generations, a total of 430 years from Abraham getting the promise at age 75 to Moses handing them the law, 430 years. And they don't know that that's what they're about to walk into, even though God's told them. And God warns us of stuff, and when we don't see it immediately, we think, I know God said that, but. And God said, don't stay in Egypt. And they said, this is nice. We're going to stay here. And God will let you do stuff. God will warn you. Okay, don't put your hand in that fire. Okay, you better lock your bicycle up. Somebody's going to steal it. Okay, you better wear a coat. It's going to rain. Okay, but it's your heart. It's our hard heads, right? And if we don't listen and we get rained on, we can't get mad because we were warned. So the children of Egypt are crying out to God. The children of Israel are crying out to God by the third and fourth generation. Let us out. Why won't you come? Because I told you not to stay down there in the first place. But we'll talk next week why they chose to stay, even though God had warned them. Okay, so I'm done. Thank you so much for listening today. Dismiss. And oh, thank you everyone for look, thank you. All the very nice compliments. And we'll continue. Wednesday, we're in the book of John. And next Sunday, we will go into why did they decide to stay in Egypt, even though God warned them not to, for 4 generations. Okay. Yeah, with the leeks and onions are delicious. Okay. Thanks. Talk to you next week.